I'd love to spend kind of the rest of our time just talking about product marketing and product launches a little bit more broadly, because you're a wealth of knowledge here and you're obviously thinking about this stuff all day long. I think my first question is maybe a basic one, like who should lead a product launch?
I mean, I generally believe that it should be a product marketer. It does depend on the characteristics of that product marketer. Like product marketers take a lot of different shapes and sizes. Some of them are not really great at leading launches because they're either not, strategic or not operationalized enough, and they may just be more kind of like content and sales enablement skewing market product marketers. So it depends on the skill set. If not product marketing, then I generally think that actually the product manager should, because they're just going to be the closest to the product itself and like be able to align timeframes and have the most holistic view of like who the customer is, why they care about it. But it does kind of depend on the character, like the structure of the marketing org. So if product marketing is like well built out, I would say product marketing should. If they're not, then typically it should be somebody in product.
And then what does kind of like the perfect product launch process look like? Like, and I'm sure it's different for every company and all that stuff, but are there like typical phases that people can follow, or somebody who's never really launched a product before? Like, what advice would you say for them as sort of building a roadmap towards that launch?
I'll try and give a concise answer on this. Like realistically, this I could spend 4 days and probably not get you through the whole process because it's a big chunky one. But I think like typically you kind of think about product launches as like you have an alpha, you have a beta, and you have a GA phase, right? So like most people kind of think about launches through the lens of the actual product delivery cycle. So upfront, like before alpha, you should be doing a bunch of research. You should, like, before the product's ever even built, product marketing should be tightly embedded with product, actually doing a lot of the like generative customer discovery to understand like who customers are, why they need this thing, what the problems that are being solved for them are, and informing the roadmap off of that. You should also be doing competitive intel at that period where you're understanding like, okay, what are the possible alternatives that customers could be using for this thing that you're launching? And what are they good and bad at? Where are we going to actually separate ourselves, and where should we be focusing efforts from a messaging perspective? Moving through the alpha period, like alpha is typically when you would just start onboarding like some of your friendlies, like you onboard like a couple of like really trusted customers. Usually it's more like dog fooding internally or working with like partners or, investors to kind of gauge the whether the product is kind of solving the problems that you set out to solve. During that period, you're really doing a lot of like core strategic development, like positioning, understanding positioning, messaging, what your channel plan is going to look like and how you're actually going to roll out and communicate that product to people. What assets do you need to get created in order to launch it? During betas, when you're like doing a lot more of the executional work, it's when you're actually like creating all of that collateral and even starting to do some of the like external pre-promotion and starting to kind of like set up teasers or exclusivity programs or beta or like closed betas with a slightly broader group of customers that may have opted into a beta program. And then at GA, when you actually launch it and make it publicly available, you obviously have launch day, which is your big splashy launch. But a couple of weeks before that, you're doing a lot of internal training, and like so much of the launch process centers around enablement for internal teams. Like everybody thinks about like the launch as like the external part of the launch and like the splashy, where are we launching to customers? Are we getting press? Are we doing a product hunt launch? Like what collateral did we create? But the important thing is really, how do you introduce that product to the teams that are going to be talking to customers about it day in, day out for the next 6 to 12 months, which is like sales, success, your marketing team, and getting the assets and collateral into their hands that they need in order to be able to sell it. So, you do a lot of training leading into launch day, then you do a big splashy day to kind of just like put a lightning strike in the ground and make sure that like the world pays attention to it. And then you should have kind of an ongoing rolling thunder approach after that, where you're taking a lot of the messaging that you use for that launch and like ideally continuing to trickle out other content and collateral to keep momentum on that launch for, 1, 2, 3 months after launch. I think I just did a podcast earlier today with Tanara from Kajabi, and she was saying that, basically like we were tearing down Equals' recent like AI assistant launch. And one of the creative things they did is they, did a blog post after launch talking about how they named the product that they had launched. And it's like taking things that are decisions that you made during your launch process to extend the launch process by creating other downstream collateral is a really like just easy low-hanging fruit creative way for you to actually be able to like to carry that momentum beyond, the day of launch itself. And that's the biggest thing is like when you're thinking about launch, the one biggest piece of advice I would give is like think about it as a commercialization process. Like don't think about it as a process leading up to launch day. You're doing a bunch of work leading into launch day, but you're also doing all that work to support a big post-launch, you know, selling process.
And how do you know if a launch is successful? Do you just look at revenue tied back to that as a user engagement? Do you recommend people set up goals ahead of time? This is something I always struggled with and we never really got right at Lattice. So I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, so you should definitely like have goals leading into the launch and like set up a true kind of OKR structure for that launch. And again, like we're talking more about like kind of bigger product launches. There's also obviously like smaller releases that are not going to have quite as much upfront planning. But I think usually like the way that launches should be contributing to revenue. Like you're not building things at your company just for fun and for giggles. It's like you are doing this stuff because it is somehow, some way going to meaningfully contribute to the company's bottom line, whether that's retaining more customers, opening a new market and like having a new TAM to be able to go after, or creating more upsell opportunities with your existing customers. And so you should be mapping to those business metrics. And the way that I like to set goals for launches is I like to set like a business metric, which is usually some kind of revenue target. Could be something like an upsell or cross-sell target if you're not talking about like top line revenue. And then you set a marketing target, which is basically the objective at the strategic level of like, okay, we want to grow this category by this percent, or we want to penetrate this new category that we're entering by this percent. And so you try and actually get to just kind of an objective level target for, what the approach to marketing you're going to take is. And then you have like a communications goal, which is how much did we influence customers' perception of the product into, whatever message you're trying to get across is. And you can set up measurement for each of those different things, right? Like, when you're talking about revenue targets, that's pretty easy. You're looking at like overall revenue impact. How did that, move up or down pre and post launch on average? And like, ideally you're looking at like a revenue growth rate. At the marketing target level, like depending on what your goal is, like category penetration, you're looking at, okay, of 10,000 customers in this category, we now have 1,000 of those. So we penetrated the market 10%. And when it comes to the communication goal, you're really doing that through like qualitative surveying and like understanding how customers regurgitate back to you the message that you tried to communicate in that launch. So there's a bunch of different ways to do it. I mean, there's like, that's a rudimentary structure for this. You can go a lot deeper into any one of those areas, but generally, like I would always try and tie it back to revenue, because like otherwise, why are you investing the effort in launching the thing in the first place?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really, really helpful framework. And you obviously talk to a lot of companies about launches. You see this a lot. Is there a trend that you see where the launch process always breaks down? Is there something where, yeah, there's always kind of that problem area in the launch?
I mean, you can take your pick. I think every single company that I talk to, barring a very, very small set of like exceptions, their launch process is in some way, shape, or form a mess. Usually it's the biggest reason that it breaks down is because they don't have a process in the first place. They don't actually have a muscle built out, and they don't have a defined set of steps that they're going to take. They don't have a defined way of understanding like which launches are we going to invest effort in, and like so there's no tiering framework in place to actually be able to identify, okay, this should be a big launch, this should be a medium launch, this should be a small launch, this thing we shouldn't launch at all. And that leads to them actually just kind of scrambling at the last second because they don't actually know what timeframes look like to be able to actually launch the thing. So they end up just basically spending, a week leading into it, and then they just send one email to customers and that's their launch. And customers, 30% of customers open it. Most of them don't actually engage. They forget about it 2 weeks later, and then that product ends up flopping. So it's like, it's very common. But the biggest place that people break down is they either just don't have a process or they don't do research to inform that launch.
Yeah. I think another one I'll add is just communication in general. I feel like when we were doing launches at Lattice, the moments where we messed up, it was like the PM thought it was a super important launch, but marketing didn't. And then that was communicated really poorly, like priorities, or like in the launch process, like one team got left behind. Like we really focused on the sales team and like enabling them, but like we kind of forgot about CS and like new, customers were kind of forgotten about. And like, yeah, like we just kind of forgot about each little stakeholder because it's a lot of work to manage all these different kind of personas on the go-to-market team and across the company.
100%. And they each need different subsets of information. They each need different types of enablement. I mean, go to market, like at the end of the day, is an enablement exercise. It's all about getting the right information into the right team's hands at the right time so they can actually go tell customers about it. And so if you don't communicate effectively, if you don't have a motion for getting those teams visibility and you don't have a motion for getting information and assets in their hands, like the launch fails no matter what, no matter how good your messaging is, no matter how good your marketing is.